Good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Herrera Brooks, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Melanie Trent DeShedder Senior Director for Research and Publications here at the VMHC. I'm delighted to welcome you for a very special lecture in our Scholar Series, and I, of course, appreciate you all braving the dreary wet weather that we're experiencing today in order to be here. However, I personally think that it might be a good omen for England's football chances in their World Cup match tonight. But less about that. Before we begin, I just want to briefly acknowledge the generous support of Comrade Mercer Hall, who has endowed the VMHC Scholar Series. Comrade serves as an honorary vice chair of the Board of Trustees of this institution and has been a champion of our work for decades. We also wish to acknowledge former VMHC President and CEO Dr. Charles F. Bryan Jr., whom this series also honors. A couple of notes about upcoming events before we move on to today's lecture. So we are one down, one more to go in June as we build momentum to the nation's 250th. And I just want to briefly thank everyone who made it out to Richmond Sailfest just a couple of weeks ago, a special event on the James River, which had huge attendance. Everyone enjoyed themselves, so thank you so much for making that a success. So you're aware, our next signature program is coming this week, and that is Illumination, an incredible art projection event that will bring America's story to life against the VMHC's historic facade on Arthur Ashe Boulevard. And that's beginning Thursday this week, so you can jump on our website and get information about that event. And then to return to our regular Scholar Series programming, we'll be welcoming Dr. Carrie Bess Douglas for a lecture on her most recent book, The Horses of Monticello, Equine Culture in Thomas Jefferson's Virginia. So that'll be on July 9th at noon, so you can giddy up and join us then. But now onto more serious subjects, of course, today's lecture. So as we move into the introduction to today's lecture, I just want to give you a brief reminder. Please make sure any devices that can beep, buzz, vibrate, do anything to disrupt either today's speaker or anyone in the audience. Please just take a moment to make sure that they will not do that. Fully half the enslaved people in the American South lived not on sprawling plantations, but on small properties, and this pattern prevailed in much of Virginia. Testimony from criminal trials in Prince Edward County reveals that cruelty was baked into the system, but also that in households of 5, 10, 15, and even 20 people, exploiters and exploited knew each other well. The enslaved, enslavers, overseers, and poor white people drank, played, slept, and even committed crimes together. Yet whippings happened often, enslaved families were split up, and in 1861, most white men in Prince Edward County were ready to fight to defend the right to own other human beings. White Virginians at once recognized the humanity of their black neighbors, even as they remained committed to a system that abused and sometimes terrorized them. And today's lecture will take a close look at this interracial life in slaveholding Virginia. Here today to lead us through this rich and complex history is Dr. Melvin Patrick Ely. Dr. Ely recently retired from his position as the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of Humanities in History at the College of William and Mary, and there Dr. Ely researched and taught the history of Black Americans, the South, popular culture and media, and race and ethnicity. Before joining William and Mary, he taught at Yale University, where he received prizes for both outstanding scholarly publication and research, as well as for teaching excellence. Dr. Ely is the author of The Adventures of Amos and Andy, A Social History of an American Phenomenon, Israel on the Appomattox, a Southern Experiment in Black Freedom from the 1790s through the Civil War, which was winner of the Bancroft Prize and the Albert J. Beveridge Award, as well as the Library of Virginia's Literary Award for Nonfiction. Dr. Ely was also a contributing author and exhibition advisor to our own Unbound Free Black Virginians, 1619 to 1865, which is still on display upstairs. And most recently, he is, of course, the author to A Terrible Intimacy, Interracial Life in the Slaveholding South. I just want to add very briefly that when I was an undergraduate in the UK, I was privileged to spend an exchange year at the College of William and Mary, where I was fortunate to be taught by Dr. Ely. He is an incredible teacher, an incredible scholar, an incredible storyteller who grew my passion for 19th century American history and Virginia history, of course, and helped me get where I am today. So it is a great honor to be able to warmly welcome him and congratulate him on a decades-long career as an educator of such important aspects of the history that we all treasure, and I hope you'll join me in giving him a great welcome today. Thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon. I'm very glad to be with you today. I do hope that you will take the occasion to go upstairs and see the exhibition that James talked about, Unbound, the History of Free Black People in Virginia, 1619 to 1865. The museum has done a beautiful job with that. Well worth your time. As he said, I'm talking about this book. This is the new book. And some have suggested that this book is a sequel to this book. And that's both true and not true. This book, Israel on the Appomattox, is also about the lives of black and white people in Prince Edward County. Israel on the Appomattox is about black people who already had their freedom before the Civil War and what their lives were like. But in researching that book, I found so many intriguing interactions between those who were enslaved and white people. And by white people, I mean enslavers, yes, but I also mean overseers, poor whites, white people who had no slaves at all. Prince Edward was a county of about 14,000 people for most of the antebellum period. And the interactions among people of all classes and both races were remarkably varied. That was a story that I wanted to tell and that I try to tell in A Terrible Intimacy. The way that I do that is that I look at 6 criminal cases. And in each of them, I provide really the entire testimony. And we do have testimony. And I walk with the reader. If you've looked at this book, or if you do look at it, as I hope you do, you'll see that I tell the story in a way that I think is different from any other book that I've seen. And one of the reasons it took me so long to publish it, to bring it about, was that I floundered about considerably before I alighted on an approach that I thought worked. And that approach is that I walk with the reader step by step through each trial. We read a bit of testimony, and then if there's anything there that's not crystal clear, I explain it in really almost colloquial language. I don't reveal the outcome of any case ahead of time. We work our way through until we get to the end, and then we talk about what that means. I should say here that some are surprised, not only that there is testimony in these cases, but that enslaved defendants received a trial at all. And here we have to say that many of the supposed infractions that enslaved people committed were committed on the farm or on the plantation, sort of within the 4 walls, if you want to use that metaphor. And the infraction or supposed infraction would be dealt with on the spot by the slave owner. And so nobody ever saw the inside of a courtroom. But if, let's say, Mr. Brown's enslaved person committed some kind of crime against Mrs. Smith's enslaved person, that could result in a trial. Or if an enslaved person physically attacked any white person, that would result in a trial. Ironically, these are the trials in which the testimony has been preserved. Trials of white people, generally we don't have testimony. Why would that be? The reason is, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, I realize, is that under the law, any capital conviction of an enslaved person had to be reviewed by the governor before the execution was carried out. And the governor had the power to commute the sentence to what was called transportation. Transportation meant that the convicted person would be sold to a slave trader who undertook to take that person outside of the United States and sell him or her there. In order for that review to happen, in order for the governor to have something to review, the testimony had to be preserved. And so again, paradoxically, it's in the trials of enslaved people that we have this rich record of what was said there. And I'm going to say more about commutation and transportation at the end of this talk. Prince Edward County, a lot of you know where that is. It's about an hour and 20 minutes drive west-southwest of here, the red spot on the map. A lot of you know that the northern boundary of the county is the Appomattox River, which looks something like this. Actually, it looks exactly like this. At least in the northwestern corner of the county, this is what it looks like. This is a river that had a very active commerce in the period before the Civil War on bateaus, they were called. Each Virginia river has its own type of bateau, and this is what the ones on the Appomattox look like. And I'm a devotee of anything to do with the water, so if you read my previous book, you can find all about boatmen. Prince Edward, as I said, it was a smallish county, but really a pretty typical county in size for the South at that time. 14,000 people, 60% of them were enslaved. That too was typical. The majority of white households in Prince Edward owned at least one enslaved person. Majority being 60-some%. Were slave owners, but most of these slaveholdings were small. Anywhere from 1 to 5 to 7 to 10, maybe 15. If you had 30 enslaved people in Prince Edward County, you were in the upper couple of percent, really. So this is a county that was full of the kind of properties that James Brooks was talking about, where the plantation, as we conceive it, is a rarity. Really, it's mostly small holdings. And why is that important? It's important because, as he also said, at least 50% of the enslaved people in the South, as of 1850, lived on properties like these. We tend to think of the big plantations, whether you're influenced by Gone with the Wind or whether you're influenced by some of the current scholarship on slavery, the Cotton Kingdom, the big plantation. But most of the South wasn't like that. Most of the South and most of Virginia consisted of areas where people knew one another. If you were an enslaver and you had 12 people whom you owned or claimed ownership of, or 15, you knew each and every one of those. That doesn't mean that you knew their innermost thoughts. It doesn't mean that they confided in you, but you saw each other every day. And even if you didn't have any slaves at all, you had interactions with black people. This is, by the way, the Prince Edward County Courthouse in about 1830. That building is not there anymore, and it's not a good picture, but I put it here just to show you that this is a small rural county. It's a small building. A number of the people in this room live in houses with more square footage than this courthouse had. Oops. Sorry. That's where I want to be. This was one of the best houses in Prince Edward County. And this is not the Taj Mahal. I mean, this is a nice house, but I just want to show you what the upper crust was. Most white people lived a good bit more simply than this. How do I know what I know about any of this, about this environment that I've described to you? This is how. This is about as prosaic looking a thing as I could possibly show you. Kind of bedraggled looking, really. There are about 75 boxes like this of records from Prince Edward County down at the Library of Virginia that have been preserved. Some counties have next to no records that have been preserved. Prince Edward has all of them, which is one of the reasons I work in Prince Edward and have done for a very long time. This is what they look like, bundles of papers. And you open up these bundles and you see sheets of paper that look like this. Not all of them are as tattered as this one, but a lot of them are. Some of them are, in fact, disintegrating. And what I do is I go through these one by one by one, and it takes a long time. And it's like what I imagine being a private detective is like, because the private detectives will tell you that their job is 99.5% utter boredom and 5% super adrenaline rush. And that's what this is, because there's a lot of, shall I use the word tedium to it, and then every now and again, Hannah's nodding her head. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then every now and again, you see something, you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I'm looking at. So this is the way that I work. The other thing that I want to say is that in these trials of black people, you have a lot of black testimony. Let's stipulate right here that these were real trials. The black defendant would be represented by an attorney appointed by the court, and it would be one of the foremost attorneys in the county. And as you'll see if you read my book, the defenses were very energetic, creative, earnest, and sometimes resulted in acquittals. However, the very same attorneys, the white attorneys who conducted these defenses, I also found in my research, turn out to be typically not only vehement defenders of the institution of slavery, but a number of them ardent secessionists in 1860-61. They can't wait to get out of the Union to preserve slavery. And yet they've spent their careers in part defending black life and limb. And before I'm done today, I'm going to try to parse out how both of those things can both be possible. I want to say, too, about the testimony at the trials. There's a stereotype that black people's testimony wasn't accepted at trial. That's absolutely not true. What is true is that a black person was not allowed to testify against a white defendant. But black witnesses could and did contradict the testimony of other white people, could in fact impugn the character of white people. This happens again and again in the cases that I bring to bear in this book. One more word about the sources. One of the things I like about these sources is that most of them were created not by somebody who's trying to make a point about anything political or social. Most of them are somebody arguing with somebody else about money, frankly, or property. There are other records like this. This is the floor plan of the courtroom where these trials took place. Why is that in the record? Because the county court was not only a court of law, but it was also the governing body of the county. So everything the county did is represented in these records. Every lawsuit that anybody ever filed, well, most of them, are represented here. So two people are quibbling about ownership of an enslaved family. There's going to be all kinds of records there, anything from personal letters to store accounts to plantation accounts that talk about those people. But those who filed the lawsuit and those who are defending against it are not trying to make any kind of point about slavery. It's not like they're writing a tract to refute what the abolitionists are saying about slavery. They're just fighting over money, fighting over property, or letting out a contract to build the courthouse, or whatever they're doing. And to me, the gold in all of this is the offhand remark. The things that people say when they're not trying to make a point. Their point is somewhere else. One example, I found a piece of paper, a slip of paper this big, that it was a bill for $10 for medical services. That's the term used. But if you look closely, what you saw was that the medical services had been administered by a doctor who was an enslaved black person. And I found this again and again. And the person who filed that slip of paper wasn't trying to make a point. Oh, black people can do doctoring too, or slavery is great, or slavery is bad. No. This was the person who owned the black doctor trying to collect the bill. $10. Where's my $10? And in the course of doing that, he reveals that there's this black doctor who's earned $10, a very large fee, for medical services. All right, let's get specific. I'm going to talk about one of the trials that's covered in my book. Is the trial of an enslaved man named Tom who killed his overseer. And there's no doubt he killed him. A bunch of people saw it happen. No doubt about that at all. There's also no question of whether Tom's going to be acquitted. A black person could not kill a white person in this society and be acquitted. What could happen, I'll reveal a little later. See, I told you, I walk you through, and I don't tell you what the end is going to be until we get to the end. All right, so there's a series of witnesses, including black witnesses. I think more black witnesses in this trial than there are white. One black witness for the prosecution, and that's typical. I find there's always one black person who gets recruited. Okay, that's tendentious on, I don't know this. I suspect gets recruited to testify against the black defendant. But then once he's done, the other black folk come forward. And what we find, it's corroborated by at least one white witness, is that in this fight that happened, it was a fight between an enslaved man and the overseer, in which each of them picked up an agricultural tool and took a whack at the other. And the black guy got the better of it, and he killed the white guy. The testimony, most of it says that the white guy started it. He struck the first blow. The black guy took some of the blows and then finally started fighting back. There's also testimony that the dead man, whose name is Richard Foster, was a drunkard, a habitual drunkard. And his own sister, who's also his employer, testifies to that effect. But also black witnesses. I told you, black witnesses can impugn the character of a white person. And these black enslaved people say, yeah, he was drunk. Oh yeah, I served him a quart of whiskey in the morning and half of it was gone by breakfast. I'm not making that up. Half of it was gone by breakfast. Black witnesses testifying to all of this. The dead man's sister, who I said is also his employer, he works for her, and thereupon hangs a tale, which I'll tell in a minute. She testifies that her brother is a habitual drunkard, but that he wasn't drunk at the time this altercation happened. What does that mean? What that means is that he's a man of bad character. He's an alcoholic or whatever. But at the time he took a whack at this enslaved guy, there was no diminished capacity. There was no question that he knew what he was doing. See, he would have been better off if his sister had said, I mean, his reputation would be better off. His sister said he was drunk when it happened. He didn't know, he wasn't himself. And when he starts whacking on this guy. No. Perfectly sober, and still he attacks Tom, the enslaved defendant. The sister also says that Tom, the defendant, has given her advice on the running of the farm. He has come to her and said, I keep telling the overseer that the crops are spoiling because of his drinking, but he won't listen to me, so I'm coming to you. She testifies to this in open court, showing no embarrassment as a white woman, men, saying that she's received advice from enslaved black men about how to run the plantation, run the farm. She almost seems to care more for Tom than she does for a dead brother. Because in effect, she's saying that what Tom did, he did in self-defense. What was the fight about, by the way? The fight was about a question that the overseer asked. He wanted to know where a surcingle was. A surcingle is a strap that you put under the belly of a horse to hold a blanket or a saddle on there. The overseer says, where's the surcingle? Tom says, I don't know. The overseer says, you're a damn liar. And that's where it starts. Now here you have to know that in this society, questioning somebody else's honor, one man questioning somebody else's honor, was taboo. And the worst thing you could say about another man was, and this is almost a formula, you see it again and again, you are a damned liar, and I can prove it. And if you say that to another white man in front of other white men, that's a fighting offense, or at least could give rise to a lawsuit. Now, the idea was white men have honor, black men have none. Tom wasn't having it. He wasn't going to be called a damned liar and not talk back. He did talk back. The fight ensued, and pretty soon the overseer is dead. One final element, or actually two. First, there was testimony that the overseer, why is his sister not a friendly witness for him or his reputation? Because he believed that the sister and the sister's husband had cheated him, the overseer, out of his inheritance. He and his employer, sister, they have the same dad, and he gave everything to her, he says. All right, well, the great thing about these stacks of records that I showed you is that you can check that out. You go to the land tax, and what you find is that sure enough, there's a plot of land, 263 acres, that the dad owned, and a few years later, the husband of the daughter owns it. She got it all. She got the land. She got slaves. She got sheep, goats, cattle, all of it. No wonder her brother, the overseer, is angry. Is that why he's a drunkard? I don't know. He may have been that before. But that's what he's angry about. I'm ahead of myself. I'll tell you in a second what this is. One last element here. I told you about the whiskey before breakfast. What I didn't tell you is that there's testimony in this trial that on the morning of the killing, the overseer and Tom, the enslaved man, were sitting together in Richard Foster's cabin, drinking together. That's where the quart of whiskey went. It wasn't. The overseer didn't drink it all. He shared it with the guy who, a few hours later, he's going to be in a fight to the death with. Now, we could spend the rest of this talk talking about how the hell that happened. But I'm not so surprised because I grew up in the South, and I knew people who could be your buddy one minute, and then maybe tomorrow decide they want to beat on you. Maybe not confined to the South. In fact, probably a lot of people get killed in this country for lesser reasons than this. But what we have here, the two guys, remember what I said about the 0.5% adrenaline? When I came to the testimony about these two guys were drinking together a few hours before one of them kills the other, I was like, whoa, I cannot believe that. And then I thought, no, I can believe it. I've known guys like that before. So that is the testimony in the trial. Now, as I say, there's a very vigorous defense by a white lawyer here, and he's one of these guys who in 1860-61 can't wait to get out of the Union. But he really wants to save this Tom. And what I say about that is, and I'm going to quote myself here, I say, these men like this attorney, were firmly in charge of their society. They had overwhelming power, including the power to protect a black individual if they wanted to. And sometimes they did want to. Well, what would protection of Tom mean? I already said he can't be acquitted. He's killed a white man in the presence of many witnesses, and he is convicted. But I also said that a conviction of this kind is going to be reviewed by the governor by law. And the governor did review this case. He received the testimony, a record of the same testimony that I'm paraphrasing to you. And if you see here, if you look closely, it says Commonwealth versus Tom. That's the name of the case. And then there's a notation right below that with one of those hand pointy things, whatever you call that. And it's pointing at a phrase that says, to be executed 6 January next. So somebody wants the governor to be sure he reviews this before 6 January. And then down at the bottom, it says submitted, postponed. And then way down at the bottom, it says 1825, December 14th, reprieved for transportation. So sure enough, no execution happens. The execution's commuted to transportation. And by the way, 2 out of 3 convictions of enslaved black people in Virginia were commuted. Why? Is it because the system was so merciful? Well, maybe, but let's take into account one fact, and that is that when an enslaved person is convicted of a capital crime, the state had to reimburse that person's owner. Now, if you hang that person, the state is out $800 or whatever it is. If the state sells that person to somebody in Brazil or to a slave trader who's going to go to Brazil, the state gets its money back. So I don't want to question the motives or the humanity of anybody, but I'm just saying there was a strong economic motive to spare these people's lives. In this case, I think there was more to it than that. I think there was an actual feeling that in a normal society, Tom would have been acquitted on grounds of self-defense. Okay, we're not going to do that because he's a slave, but we're not going to hang him either. That is the outcome here. The bigger point to me, and this is one that when I was still teaching, I used to harp on quite a bit, and that is, what is white supremacy? We need to understand the concept of white supremacy. Everybody thinks they know what it is. Okay, it's white people lording it over black people. Yeah, it is that. But why do we call it supremacy? If you are supreme, what does that mean? It means essentially you can do what you want. And suppose what you want in a particular case is to cut this black person some slack, or to acquit them. And by the way, not to issue a spoiler here, but there is an acquittal or two in my book. You decide, this is a black person I want to defend. This is a black person who's been wronged. This is a black person I grew up with. So I'm going to help him out. That's what supremacy means. It means you get to decide. What are you going to do? You're going to help? You're going to hinder? You're going to kill? You're going to spare? That's why we call it supremacy. And that's part of what this book is about. The other thing it's about, as I said at the beginning, and as James said in the introduction, is about closeness of people, or as I called it in my previous book, callousness and closeness. Here, for example, is one of those slips of paper. In real life, it's about this big. And this is an enslaved defendant who wasn't spared. Because what does this say? It's a carpenter's bill. Reuben Perry issues a bill to the county to one gallows furnished, $10. Well, so he got $10 for building a gallows on which an enslaved convict was killed. So that's the other way this thing can go down. This is what's called a patrol return. This thing called the slave patrol, where volunteers, white men, go out on horses several times a month patrolling to see whether enslaved people or even free black people are doing things they ought not to do or going places they ought not to go. These guys are paid. Those numbers are the number of hours they worked and the amount that they were paid. And the patrols are famous. Everybody's heard of them. In black folklore, the patrollers are a thing. The patrollers are the bad guys. And here's the evidence of it. I've got tons of patrol returns in those documents that I showed you. On the other hand, you'll see in my book cases of actual love, not just sexual love, but something like romantic love between a black and a white individual. And this is a picture of a man, the grainy picture of this seated man. This is a man named William Colley, who became one of the foremost black clergymen in America and also in Africa in the late 19th century. He is the son of a white man in Prince Edward County who, before the Civil War, became, and I'm going to say romantically involved with a woman who was enslaved by another guy. I say romantic because he was giving her expensive gifts. He gave her a music box. They had 2 children together. It's not his own enslaved person. He can't compel her. They were, to all appearances, a couple, ultimately broken up. And that's in the book, how that got broken up in detail. But here, their son goes on to become one of the most prominent African Americans in the United States in his generation. This woman is also the product of a years-long, even decades-long union between a white man and a free black woman. And I won't go into her whole story, but much of this family now lives in the United States as classified as white people. Some live in the U.S. Classified as black people. So there's, I said, the title of the book is, after all, A Terrible Intimacy. I've dwelt to a certain extent on the terribleness, but I picked that title for a reason, because there's all this intimacy, and yet there's the terribleness too. I know that's not a word, but I'm going to use it anyway. And then there's the most terrible thing of all to me that Jim Brooks was talking about, and that is that the same people, the same white people, who in some cases at least were very close in some ways to black people, almost universally in 1861 were ready to pick up guns to defend this system. I think that's a tragedy. In the classical Greek sense, really. This is the tragedy. Okay, I said callousness and closeness. Just a few more slides here. There is one chapter in the book, and I'm not going to spoil this at all, except to say that in that chapter is chronicled treatment of a certain enslaved man that involves shackles, which is not that unusual, I'm sorry to say. Beating of this man with tobacco sticks. A tobacco stick is a stick about 4 feet long and 1 inch thick that you hang tobacco on to cure it. The owner of this particular band that I'm talking about, according to testimony, broke 4 or 5 of these sticks over this man's head, chained him to the floor, took pliers and pulled sound teeth out of this man's mouth, until finally the victim of all of this snapped and struck back with this. This is a grain cradle. It's a harvesting tool. What it is, it's a scythe that has wooden fingers on it that catch the grain as you cut it down. It helps you stack it. This thing has a blade on it that you do not want to be on the wrong side of. And the slave owner essentially had his leg amputated. It was still hanging on by thread, and he died 2 weeks later of gangrene because he refused to submit to treatment because it was too painful. But that story is in the book as well, and that's another iteration of the terribleness. This is not a book that is going to make you feel warm and fuzzy. It's not going to make you think, oh, well, people getting along pretty well. People got along, sometimes very well, except when they didn't. And when they didn't, it was very, very grim, or could be. So I'm going to finish by reading you about 4 paragraphs in the book. And here I write this after I conclude the discussion of the trial of Tom, the one who killed the overseer. And his sentence has been commuted. He's going to be transported overseas, not hanged. It's hard to know how to feel here. Relieved that this man wasn't hanged, or outraged that he was torn away from all he knew and sent to God knows where to do God knows what work because he defended himself against an abusive white man. We might also ask ourselves, if we're seeking to learn how slavery worked, whether we were justified in spending time analyzing the dysfunctional family dynamics of white people. Here I'm talking about the whole inheritance conflict. Let's begin by admitting it would have been difficult not to examine the white family. After all, one of the most striking elements of this affair is Lucy Whitehead's near defense of Tom after he killed her brother. She seems to have cared more for Tom, the enslaved black man, than for Richard. Yet to my mind, Lucy's attitude is no mere oddity. To define literally means to draw the outer limits of a thing. That's why I don't casually write off findings that surprise me. As we discover what was possible in the Old South, we're taking steps toward defining what was normal there, and I'm putting the term normal in quotes. Many 19th century slave owners said that enslaved black people were part of the family. Some white people today, defending their ancestors, continue to say the same thing. And in a way, Tom was part of the Foster family, but not in the way those who romanticize the Old South would have in mind. He gave advice to one member of that family, Lucy, and she listened to him because he was smart and observant. Tom was the sometime drinking partner and sometime adversary of another family member, Brother Richard, the overseer. Tom was as proud and assertive as he could be within the environment he lived in. But the Foster Whitehead family was riven by parent-child estrangement and sibling rivalry, and Tom was sucked into that snake pit against his will. Richard Foster Jr.'s smoldering hatred seems to have been aimed not so much at Tom as at his own brother-in-law, his sister, and his father. The feeling seems to have been mutual. But these were slaveholders, and so slavery thrust a black man into the middle of all this, and he became the target of the white son's displaced anger at his family, and maybe at himself. Slavery gave Richard Foster a convenient target for his rage, because it granted him tyrannical authority over Tom and placed nearly absolute limits on Tom's right to defend himself. Ralph Waldo Emerson wasn't far wrong when he wrote that slavery poisons and depraves everything it touches. Tom suffered collateral damage arising from a conflict among white people. A conflict, by the way, that revolved largely around who got to possess sizable parcels of black human property. For all the sordidness and loathing within the Foster family, it's a black man who nearly ends up with a rope around his neck, and who ultimately must live out a life of banishment and bondage somewhere in the tropics. Thank you.
Thank you. You talked about white men and black women. What about white women and black slaves?
Well, let me back up to this picture. Yeah, that one. This is the granddaughter of a white woman who entered into a relationship with an enslaved man owned by her father. And she had this child. This woman's mother was her child, and that child grew up and she was half half black, half white, a mixed race. She became involved in a relationship with a white man. She was considered Negro at the time. She got involved with a white man, and they together had, I think it was 7 children, and this is one of them. And then in a different family, the one I showed you right before this one, they had a child who ended up living in New York City, and I found his birth certificate, which he applied for at the age of 42, in which he declares himself white. So my answer to your question is yes, the interracial relationships happened in both directions. Of course, the most common was the one that we all know about, and that's the sexual exploitation of enslaved women by those who, the men who owned them, or their sons. And it's important to remember that, but it's also very much part of the picture that there are relationships of many kinds in both directions. But down here in the front.
Can you talk about one of the more interesting acquittals that you said were rare?
I could, but the one that I would talk about would be just a world-class spoiler for the book. But here's what I will tell you. How many have read To Kill a Mockingbird or seen the movie? Okay, so you know that there's a charge, a false charge of rape against a black man. It's not in the era of slavery, but the principle is the same. And Tom Robinson is his name, that character, and you know what happens to him at and after his trial. I'm just going to say that there's a case in the book that involves a similar accusation of rape that it turns out differently. And really, if I say any more, none of y'all are going to buy the book, and we might as well just cancel the book signing that's going to happen after this, which, by the way, I hope each and every one of you attends. So that's okay. I'm trying to think. Acquittals are rare. I mean, what you'll get is commutations more often, but the occasional acquittal, yeah, Kara.
One of my questions has to do with who Tom was forced to leave behind and whether or not any of those fellow enslaved individuals were family members of his that testified on his behalf.
Yeah, okay. Let me create a context for answering that by saying that the splitting up of families, of black families, happened a lot. Even the Virginia history textbook that I had in the 7th grade, back in a previous century, a book that was written at the behest of the Virginia General Assembly to create a more favorable picture of antebellum Virginia, even that book said that the splitting up of black families was the worst feature of slavery. So I find it all the time. I find children as young as 4, 5, 6 being removed from their parents, spouses being separated, and all of that. Now, what about Tom specifically? You already know that that plantation records, agricultural records, typically don't specify, or often don't specify, who's married to whom. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. In this particular case, Lucy Foster, the sister who testified in effect in defense of Tom, I looked at the will in which she, and through her husband, got the dad's land. You know, I said the sheep, the goats, the cattle, the land, the enslaved people, all that. The enslaved people she got include Tom and a woman named Scylla, who is one of the witnesses at the trial. In fact, several of the trial witnesses actually belong to her, not surprisingly, to her husband. Of course they do. That's who was there to see this thing happen. What's not clear is whether Tom and Scylla are spouses. They're listed sequentially. Tom, comma, Scylla, comma, somebody else, comma, somebody else. My guess, wild guess, she was his wife, and if she was, she never saw him again. The odds are he had a wife, a spouse. I mean, I think he was in his 30s. He was, in a sense, if you can say this under slavery, a man of means, in that I think he was the driver on that farm, the driver being a sort of a black middleman between the overseer and the other black workers. So my guess is, yeah, he left a wife behind, but I'll never know, I don't think. I shouldn't say that, because some of the things that I knew that I would never know, a few years later, I found out the answer to that thing. And that's the good thing about working on the same county for 40 years. You know, there's no statute of limitations. You never know what on earth you're going to find next. And sometimes it fills out a story in a way that you never saw coming.
Have you done anything to preserve the papers that you've been working with?
One thing I did was, I shouldn't say this, decades ago, there was a plan. Okay. There was a plan to move them to a place called the State Records Center. The State Records Center is out by the airport. It's like a sort of a warehouse, and they take good care of the records there, but it's only open at certain times, and I'm not sure it's open to the public at all anymore. Maybe it is. But they would have been far less accessible there. And I was, by coincidence. I was asked to write a piece for the Library of Virginia about all the great stuff they have there, and in the manuscript for that article I said, however, tragically, they're getting ready to move these records to a place where most people can't get to them. And when I turned in that manuscript, I pretty soon heard back from someone fairly highly placed who said, you know what, I think we'll keep those here in Richmond. So I did that, and I'm being very indiscreet to tell you that, but speaking of statute of limitations, that was 30 years ago, and if anybody's going to be mad at me now for that, let it fly. As far as the physical condition of the papers is concerned, I frankly am worried, because when I went back and looked into them for the current book, in one or two cases I opened the carton and there were like crumbs of paper. You know, somebody had pawed through that thing and without the proper respect and sort of wreaked havoc. Now, it is true that the Library of Virginia, which is a wonderful organization, just great people, they have a project where they are photographing and or digitizing as many of these old records as they can. The pardon records, when I showed you the commutation of Tom's sentence, it may have looked a little hazy to you. That's because that's on microfilm now, or microfiche or whatever. So no thanks to me at all. They are trying to render these records into a form that will not be subject to the storms and stresses that physical records are subjected to. Okay.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you chose to organize these chapters. Do you take a more of a chronological approach, or did you take a while to sort of think about what themes you wanted to emphasize?
You know, it is chronological. And except that two of the cases, I think, happened within months of each other, and I could have fudged that. So there's a little bit of a conceptual arc to this as well. I wouldn't have stuck to the chronology if I thought that that impeded the flow of the book. And the book ends. Well, the book begins with okay. There's an opening word which is very important. If you get the book, you should read that. But chapter 1, in fact, is Tom and Richard Foster. The last chapter is one that I regard in part as a reminder of what in the end slavery actually was, despite whatever intimacies and instances of empathy there were. So there's that arc. There's a beginning that needs to be the beginning, an end that needs to be the end, and then in the middle, I guess I just decided, yeah, I'll go with the chronology.
And I think this might be all we have time for.
If the cover was the first picture you showed, it was an interracial couple. What do you know about that family?
Not one little thing.
Okay.
The jacket image of the book, let's go back to that. One of the most difficult projects of my life as a historian was finding a cover image, a jacket image for this book. You would think that interracial groups or whatever would be a thing that's out there in the photographic archive, but no, it was difficult. And I picked this one for two reasons. Number one, it was just about the only doggone one I could find. And number two, because I thought it was just spectacularly good because of what to me is the ambiguity of it. What is the relationship here? Who is this black woman? Is she just a servant, a slave? Is she this guy's spouse, concubine? Is she the caregiver for this child? Is she some combination of these? But what really makes this work for me, I wonder if anyone can guess. the look on her face. My God, what is going on there? Has she suffered? Well, she's enslaved. She suffered. Is there love? Is she confused? Why? And usually in these pictures from antebellum times, if there's very often an enslaved woman there who is probably the caregiver for whatever children are there. But usually, she's more in the background. Usually, it's crystal clear what her role is. This is anything but crystal clear. So what I wanted is somebody to see this book jacket and think, wow, what's up here? And then, frankly, to want to pick up the book and look inside and see what's up. Now, they're not going to find out what's up with these particular people. I don't know who they are. I found this on the internet. I don't remember exactly where. But what they are going to find is a sampling of all of the different intricacies and terrible intimacies that I think are so intrinsic to what slavery actually was. And James tells me we are out of time. So I'll thank you again.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. And just a reminder that Dr. Ely's book is available in the gift shop, and he's going to be signing books in just a few moments in Commonwealth Hall. But thank you so much for making the time to come out and support us today.